So welcome everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started here. I now call to order this work session of the Anchorage Assembly regarding fiscal year 2022 first quarter proposed budget revisions and tax levies. It is Friday, April 15, 2022, and we are noticed from 1 to 3 p.m. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll on the phone, please, and then we'll go around the room.
Assemblymember Rivera. Are there any other Assembly members on the phone?
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And then we'll go around the table here, starting with Mr. Weddleton.
Here. V. Peterson.
Meg Zelitel.
Austin Quinn Davidson.
Forrest Dunbar.
Christopher Constant.
Suzanne LaFrance.
Office of Management and Budget.
Dean Gates, Assembly Council.
And we have Ms. Jones from the clerk's office and other members of the administration present. Welcome, everyone, and members of the public. Thank you for joining us today. I want to note that the documents are available online. If you go to muni.org and click on Assembly, and at the top, click on Assembly Work Sessions and scroll down to today, there are a number of documents, including the presentation that we're about to see. AR 2022-98 and AR 2022-99 are also available online, as is the link to the 2022 budget. And with that, I will turn to Ms. Frasca.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to see the Assembly in person today. And as I know all of you appreciate, as part of the preparation for the first quarter proposal that's before you, it takes a village. And I have my villagers with me. I have Marilyn Bonzoff and Courtney Peterson. And Christine Chestnut is also online. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to note for the record, we were joined by Ms. Kennedy. Thank you.
Thank you. So I appreciate them being here. And then also Dan Moore is requested is here from Treasury. So what we're here today to talk to you about is the fine tuning that we go through as part of the mill rate setting process in order to have Treasury send out the property taxes. So with that, we'll go to the first slide and give you an idea of how MOA ended in 2021. So at the end, in terms of fund balance of the 5 major funds, there was about a $2.5 million amount left over, if you will. And that assumes full FEMA reimbursement, which I know the Assembly members are familiar with in terms of the outstanding FEMA requests. It's also an unaudited number as they're going through that process. 2 departments overspent in terms of the end of the year, and that's been reflected in the information that we submit to the Assembly in one of the, what we call our beg forgiveness legislation. Equity and Justice overspent by $14,000, and that's associated with an unanticipated leave cash out. Fire Department overspent $1.3 million, and that's primarily associated with overtime expenditures. And then the beg forgiveness also includes some year-end type adjustments. They don't add to the spending column, but it's workers' compensation, general liability, and then also a room tax payment that's made to the contractor in calendar year 2020, but it applies to 21. So it's part of that adjustment process. And then in terms of where revenues came in, actuals came in $263,000 higher than what was projected by Treasury. And I think that's pretty darn impressive in terms of their accuracy in a crazy world. So next slide. And so a sort of an overview or a snapshot of where we are in what we have before you in terms of first quarter changes. At first, we do meet our fund balance requirements, the 10% for bond rating purposes and the 2% set aside for emergencies. Revenues, in terms of property taxes, we are $5.8 million under the tax cap. And a lot of that's due to the fact that non-property tax revenues are projected to come in at $11.4 million, more than what was anticipated when the budget was put together last fall. And then spending overall, when compared to last year, is up $3.6 million, which represents a less than a 1% increase in spending.
As soon as there's a break.
Do you want to go ahead and take questions through the presentation?
Whatever you
Okay.
prefer.
And before I go to Mr. Constant, I do want to note too that Ms. Allard and Mr. Presverdia are excused from today's work session. Mr. Constant?
Thanks. I just wanted to make sure that the record is clear that that 11.4 million projection by the administration, because the assembly at the point of the budget actually made its own projection that had those funds established in it in November.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Weddleton and then Ms. Zelitel.
Well, thanks. And if this is a question that'd be better dealt with later, it'd be fine. But so it says 5.8 million under the tax cap, which is, I guess, depending on how you view it, is real. So we have a tax cap, but then the amount we can actually tax is decreased by marijuana taxes go in there, alcohol tax. We got part of that, and then is there alcohol tax? I'm thinking that's outside. Okay. Oh yeah, that's right. But so marijuana, car rental tax, bed tax, and so on, but it's decreased. So I think what you're saying is from this top one, we're 5.8 million lower because of all those things flowing in. So the real tax cap is after all those non-property tax revenues are in there. Is that, I mean, that's the way I've always thought of it. I think
Sure. But when we do have the tax cap calculation in
Right.
the packet, so we'll be able to talk about that. But this is after you go through all
Mhm.
those gyrations, you get to the property taxes allowed
right.
after you've taken all those. And this is 5.8 million below what is allowed.
Okay, so that's
Okay,
good. Oh,
Yeah.
fo-
And
wait,
bed
so-
taxes are outside the tax cap too. Just a little.
So you have this cap, and then you put in all the revenues from all the other stuff, and you get a new number, and you're saying you're 5.8 below that new
Correct.
number?
Correct.
Okay, I look forward to that. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Next is Ms. Zelitel and then Mr. Dunbar
Thanks, Madam Chair.
and then Ms. Kennedy.
So as we start to look and build out this conversation, where's our baseline? What are we starting with? Are we starting with the 2022 approved budget by the Assembly after the veto overrides? Or are we starting with the 2022 budget that the administration has been working from January? That was I guess I would call it the proposed budget.
We're going from the latter.
So not from the one that the Assembly approved after the veto overrides.
Right. We're working from the one that does not include the funds that the CFO could not certify. And so that's the budget from which we are working.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Zelitel. Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And if this discussion is more appropriate for later about the tax cap, Cheryl, that's fine. But so this is your 5 point under the tax cap as calculated today. How much has the tax cap increased between November, December of last year and today? So I think the projected property taxes at least was at one level. And then I think that number has increased. Is that right? That is our tax cap number is higher now than it was when we built the budget back in November, December.
I think we even put that in here if I remember.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll have to get,
If it's later on, that's fine.
Yeah. First quarter verse on slide 5, first quarter revisions, property taxes to be collected are 2.8 million less than what was anticipated based on the version of the budget that we're working from.
I'm sorry, can you say the slide number?
On page 5.
Oh, page 5. Okay.
Yeah, under property taxes. So it relies on 2.8 million less than what was reflected in the budget you approved last fall.
No, that's not what. Yeah, I don't think that's correct. So what I'm saying is we projected a certain amount of property taxes we could collect under the tax,
Oh, I know.
under the tax cap in November, December. How much has that increased between then and first quarter budget revisions?
Yeah, I sorry, I don't have that chart here. Do we? Yeah, no, we didn't. We can get that back to you.
Right. So the 5.8 million, I believe, is not under what we proposed in November. It's under this new increased tax cap amount, right?
Yeah, it didn't increase that much. Okay, so Marilyn is showing me that you had taxed to the cap, which was 295.9 million. And so this bill, this taxes to 293.1. So 295 was what you approved last year, and so this is 291. 293, excuse me.
So we taxed at 295.9 and you're proposing 293 point something.
Right.
That difference is about 2.5 or 2.6, but here you're saying it's $5.8 million under the cap. So I guess from that I can project that the tax cap has actually increased by 3 million. And so you're calculating this difference between what is now probably almost 299 million is the property tax cap, and you're saying you're 5.8 million under that. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, Mr. Dunbar. I'd have to sit down before I'm willing to say it's correct. I'd have to sit down and look at the numbers.
Okay.
So if you want to take a timeout, we can do that.
Well, no, I think we'll keep going. I think on page 12 we'll have that same conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, wait.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. So I have 4 other members in the queue.
I just,
And I know, Mr. Weddleton, you wanted
point of
to.
order, I guess. I
What's
have
that?
a request that Cheryl turn on her mic and speak into it.
Okay.
They can't hear in the back. Thanks.
Did you want to stay in the queue, Mr. Weddleton, or was that it? Just okay, thank you. So we'll go next to Ms. Kennedy, then Mr. Constant. Actually, yeah, thank you. Ms. Kennedy, Ms. Quinn Davidson, and then Mr. Constant. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to get a better handle on the fund balance number at this point. And mostly because it says that these are unaudited numbers on the fund balance. But we had a preliminary number for the end of 2021 of about $58 million deficit. So are we, and obviously that's in regard to reimbursement potential with FEMA. So is that still considered I mean, I may be even wrong on that number. I know there've been a couple of different numbers that have been thrown out, but anyway, are we, is there still any kind of a distinction here that we should really be looking at this? I mean, it seems to me that the 2.5 is basically kind of a reflection of the way everything played out in 2021, but is not necessarily reflective of what is really going to be audited and what would be reflected in like the CAFR. And it's not called the CAFR anymore, and I forget what the acronym is for it now. But anyway, that's kind of where I'm going, trying to figure out how we get this number here, but our CAFR number is quite different. So how do I reconcile that? Thanks.
Well, thank you. Ms. Crystal, Ms. Kennedy, this is an unaudited number that does assume that we have FEMA reimbursement as we're requesting. In terms of what the financials may say, that's something that's on the other side of the house, and we won't know for months. So because of the timing, we have to go with the best information we have in order to go through the amendment process to set the property taxes. We don't have the luxury of waiting for the financials to be completed and have an audited number. So this is the best estimate that working with finance that they provided that we could have, with the assumption then that FEMA will be reimbursed.
Thank you, but we should probably still be cognizant of the fact that that's potential,
That's a
just
bit,
hanging out there, looming out there
Exactly.
somewhere. Thank you.
yes.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Ms. Quinn Davidson, and then Mr. Constant.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just for folks who, this budget process is new, or you're trying to track, what Ms. Zelitel asked was, did the administration follow the charter and use the Assembly's approved budget? And what the administration said is, no, we did not. We just did what the mayor wanted to do anyway. So I just want to make that really clear. We've had a lot of questions. I've had a lot of emails. The Arts Commission, or rather arts individuals who usually get community grants, reached out to us. We've heard from other people saying, where's the money that was approved by the Assembly? The body that approves the budget. And the administration said, oh, no, we didn't follow the approved budget. We did what we think is right. And I just want to make it really clear, this is unprecedented. I've never seen this before while I've been in this role, and continues to be disappointing. I hope the administration, now that they've seen that our revenue projections were correct, will get on board with also certifying the programs that were approved in the fall that are waiting to be funded. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. Mr. Constant?
Thank you. Cheryl, I know you're new. You came in halfway through. So in some ways you inherited some of the challenges that you get to be in the hot seat to go through and reconcile in this truing of our budget. And so you said something that I completely agree with, that it's pretty impressive that the Treasury was able to estimate revenue within roughly $250,000 on a $500 million or even larger budget, depending on what aperture you look at it from, school district and everything else. And so and then we face the fact that in December, we were able to project right on point, almost within $500,000 of the budget that is proving now to be true. But at the time, the municipality could not certify those monies. So my question is, where is the deficiency in the departments that would be on one side of the house able to project within $250,000 on a $500 million budget, and on the other side not be able to say with any certainty, when you have just a team of loose elected officials working with their friends to figure out, we know where the projections are. So where do we work to ensure that the projections are accurate next year as we go through this process?
I think if you look at historically, Treasury has done a fine job of projecting revenues. In my previous tours of duty at the municipality, I don't recall an assembly getting into the revenue projection business. Okay, I realize I haven't been here for the last, 9 years. So that may have changed. So I don't think there's anything broken in terms of the projection process that we have. I do suggest that you revisit the math that you used with your amendments last fall in terms of the room tax. You guys, if we want to get into the details of this, we can, or save that for another time. But I think there's some math issues even with how you did your amendments, that you still didn't have enough money to pay for the things that you appropriated. And be glad to have further discussions about that. But I appreciate your perspective and I respect it. And there may be legal issues that need to be worked through.
Yeah, I absolutely agree on the question of what the charter says in the law. And yeah, maybe the numbers were off in this or that category, but broadly they were quite accurate, our projections. And the reason why the members felt the need to do that was because the members, I believe, felt like we weren't getting an honest appraisal of the budget, right? There was something going on there, which now we see that the administration had intentions for those dollars. And it certainly raises the perception among people who are following this process that somebody was holding the Easter egg for themselves. And so that's a concern that I have as we walk through this process, is figuring out how going forward we have, for example, when we tried to do our traditional process of at least the last 5 to 7 years of working with the administration to establish the priorities and to set forth how we're going to grow and develop and hold the line on the budget and all of the municipal processes, we were rebuffed and told, no, this is our job. And so we just have to figure that out, because it is one municipality.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Ms. Zellatel?
Thanks. I won't be as nice as Mr. Constant. So when we put the budget forward and we approve it, we take the risk that our math might be bad and that we have to clean it up at first quarter or along the way. I think that is the hard line here. And I think what we've done in this current order of operations is make this first quarter budget revision way harder than it needs to be. What we have to do is we have to go back and reset to the assembly approved budget, and then we can talk about what additional revenues are available. And that is a terribly complex and onerous position for the legislative branch to be in. And it is not what we typically do. And frankly, this is one of the things with April elections. The first thing you encounter as a new member on this body is first quarter budget revisions and setting the mill rate. And it is, I would say, infinitely more complex this year than it needs to be and that it should be, especially for these new members coming on the body. So I wish we weren't in this position, but it's the position we're in. So I'm hoping we can find a way to have this conversation that somehow draws us back to what the approved budget was, and then based on the approved budget by the assembly, what is the additional revenue we have and what are the proposals for using that revenue? Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Zelitel. Mr. Gates?
Yes, thank you. I would just like to make one point of clarification. With the fund certification issue, certification of projected revenues and all of that, there was some reference to the charter. Our charter, from my reading of it, says nothing about certifying funds, nothing about fund certification. That's not in our charter at all. What is in the charter is that the assembly approves the budget as amended, and that throughout the year, if the mayor sees that revenues are not going to meet the appropriations, he should report that to the assembly. The assembly may decrease the budget. This is in charter at sections 1305 and 1306. So the fund certification issue when preparing the budget with fund certification of projected revenues and everything that seemed to be the issue here is a function of our code and not of charter.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. Seeing no other members in the queue, if you want to go ahead and continue.
Sure. And to Ms. Zalatel's point, if your staff needs help with the math, we can help in getting to the point where you're trying to get. Okay, so the next slide is the approach that we took to first quarter. We focused on the adjustments, the fine tuning part of the process, and not major program changes. We funded departments with the expectation that they will have the resources available to manage, to come in on or under budget at year end. And I know you've seen over the years, police and fire especially, in terms of overtime being a perennial first quarter item. So our hope is we've added money to those departments so that they will have the resources available for the full year. Contractual obligations, typically that's a first quarter process for the firefighters, AMEA. They have new collective bargaining agreements, which are funded in here. CPI increases in contracts that, like the Performing Arts Center, the museum, those kinds of things are included. And then we adjusted revenues based on Treasury's updated forecast.
We've got a question from Mr. Dunbar.
Not so much a question as a comment. And again, I don't want to keep beating a dead horse, but there's no major program changes if you take the mayor's unilateral budget as the baseline. If you take the 2022 assembly approved budget, there are major program changes because, for example, we said $1.5 million to the mental health first responders program, and this revised proposal doesn't take that as the baseline. It takes the baseline as what the mayor proposed back in November. So if this mayoral proposal is accepted, there will be major program changes from the 2022 assembly approved budget, just none from his unilateral version. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Constant?
Mine might be another bit of a softball, Cheryl. We referenced on this slide the CPI for contract adjustments. What does the current environment of mass inflation do to the framework of our consumer price index process for our budget? It's over 5 years average rolling, so probably not that much yet.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Thank
That's
you.
correct. And we'll talk about that in the tax cap, but then another place. Yeah. Okay. All right. In terms of the next revenue changes, room tax increased 5.5 million. And keep in mind, there's a corresponding $1.8 million spending increase when we give the money to visit Anchorage. So it's not all available. Property taxes, 2.8 million less in property taxes when compared to our version of the approved budget. We have 2.3 million in school district 2021 property tax over collection. Okay, and you may wonder, oh my gosh, what is that about? And so what happens, just because of the fiscal years, the school calendar year, the ASD's fiscal year, okay, we go to the taxpayers in June and we collect property taxes for the school district. In October, they do their student enrollment count, on which the state bases its payment to the school district. There is a ceiling on the amount that a local community can contribute to the school district. And so what happens is, in this case, we were unable to give the entire amount collected, at least anticipated to be collected for school purposes, to the district because we were at that ceiling of the maximum amount. So as a result, we over collected 2.3 million in property taxes, which we are proposing be returned in another way to taxpayers to help pay for services under this budget. Okay.
Mr. Constant?
Thanks. That was your last little phrase there was exactly where my mind was at. So it's not really practicable to return the money to the taxpayers because people die, things change, properties are sold. So what's the mechanism for the return?
It means that there's 2.3 million from this hand, instead of collecting an additional 2.3 in new taxes.
For the school district
For
next year.
municipality. I mean, we can't, we're governed by how much we can contribute to the school district by state law.
Right, I understand
Yeah.
that. And so, right, so the money is in their budget and we would send, are we proposing to use it for other municipal taxpayer issues or school district issues? Like, is that forward funding next year's pool by $2.3 million so we would collect that much less for the school district?
So we're also limited, well, I guess you could go through some gyration. I'd have to think about how it might work. But we're also, it's not that we thought about, well, could we give it to the school district? Still give it to them. But again, that would be exceeding the maximum amount that we can give them. You can give it to them for, what is it, for nutrition programs and maintenance. And I think there's one other purpose, not classroom related or instruction related.
So possibly school resource officers?
No,
Why not? These are APD
because
staff.
that's part of their budget.
No, it's our budget. We hire and fund the staff of the police, right? Don't we? Am I wrong?
We were told that that's not a purpose for which we could contribute to the school district's budget. You just said to
Oh,
give
you're
it to
right, to
them.
keep it. Okay, that's fair from my
yeah.
previous question. But
yeah.
just, so I see two ways. One would be to fund school resource officers would be great, solve some headaches for people at least for the next year. Or one would be prepay some percentage of next year's levy for the school district from those refunded dollars so that we don't have to collect that much for the school district for the next year. It seems pretty straightforward, but I'd love to hear how.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Go ahead and
going?
continue.
Okay. Investment income, an adjustment downwards of 500,000, as well as an increased cost for TANs. And again, this is a change from the budget as it was before you last fall. And then the MOA trust fund contribution, the Investment Advisory Commission recommended the formula be, I think it's a 4% of market value payout. Dan's here to correct that, which resulted in a $2.1 million reduction in the amount of coming from the MOA trust fund. And this was before the assembly, probably a month or two ago, in the form of an AIM, which you accepted, the commission's recommendation.
We have a question or a comment, Mr. Dunbar?
Well, at the time, actually, remember, I asked Dan if we accept this AIM, does it actually do this? Because you have to come back to us for an ordinance to change that. And so as much as I know, well, we have an ordinance set at 4.5. You didn't come back to us with an ordinance to change it to 4, right?
I believe it says up to.
The ordinance, the code is written, it's not to exceed 4.5%. So we can actually be below that without actually changing the code.
Okay, so we built a budget last year that said we're going to take 4.5, and then the administration has decided we're going to switch that to 4. And the assembly, we might have said, well, we want to smooth this out. We're going to do 4.25 this year and 4 next year. We're going to step off. But you're saying the administration is saying, no, in this version at least, we have just decided we're going to 4.
Correct. We're recommending, and this is a budget, was based on a prudent investment policy.
So can I ask, if we said, no, we're going to do 4.25 this year and 4 next year, and we put that in our amendments for this, what actually happens? Are you going to follow that recommendation? Or are you going to say, no, we're keeping it 4 because that's what we've decided?
That would be a mayor's call.
I think the trust fund is this Dan Morgan Treasury. I'm the sole fiduciary for the trust.
Dan,
And I'm the sole fiduciary for the trust, but everyone trusts. And I have to list my investment consultant.
Come over here.
Yes.
And
Sorry about
turn
that.
on the micro.
Um,
I'm sorry, where did that?
Felix,
Felix
point of
can't
order.
hear. Yeah.
Mr. Yes. Thank you.
I will.
And is the microphone on?
Can you hear me? Okay. So my name's Dan Moore, I'm the city treasurer, and I'm also the sole named fiduciary per charter for the MOA Trust Fund. So the trust fund really has to be, the primary objective is to maintain the purchasing power of the trust fund. The trust fund is in the hole when it comes to its purchasing power at the moment. And we all should be aware of that because the market's been very volatile, very negative. Plus you have inflation that's been terrible. You combine those two numbers and we are probably at minus 14% this year. It makes 0 sense to delay or to ratchet down to 4%. The sooner we get there, the better. And that's my view as the sole fiduciary for the trust fund. The assembly can approve whatever you want to approve, but I have a duty, a fiduciary duty to do the right thing. And I've listened, we went through a very detailed process with the Investment Commission, and it is extremely clear to me it needs to be at 4.0% ASAP. So that's the position I'm taking.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Ms. Zelitel?
Thank you. I actually have a question for council. So my question is, in order to set the rate to be taken from the trust fund, do we do that by resolution then? Or is simply accepting the AIM setting the rate? Because if there's action to be taken, we should make sure we take that concurrent with what we're using in the first quarter budget revisions.
The question, as I understand it, is whether the, I guess, return 4% or up to the max 4.5 can be done by resolution or by an AIM, or which is the instrument for the assembly to use.
So I guess it's 2 questions. Is it a policy choice by the assembly? And if so, how do we express our policy choice? And it may be a question where you need to get back to us, but I think it's a pertinent question we need to explore as we move through 1Q.
Yeah, and I think that question is too important for me to answer off the cuff right here on the spot. So I would like a little time before I do respond. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Zelitel. Thank you, Mr. Gates. We'll go ahead and
Yes,
continue.
thank you. Okay, the next slide is other additional revenue changes. The permanent fund dividend garnishment and counter fines because of the higher dividend / energy check that's being discussed. That would provide for another 3.1 million in revenues to MOA. Ambulance fees. This is the supplemental emergency medical transport. We adjusted the revenues based on 21 actuals plus an application that was submitted to the state of Alaska regarding regarding 2019 activities. So as a result of those, an additional 1.7 million. In land sales, increased land sales, another $907,000. And then building permits, the revenues of which go into the building service area, an additional $628,000.
So I've got two members in the queue. First is Mr. Constant and then Ms. Zelitel.
Thank you. So the ambulance fees, is this, Chief, the first time these revenues have really hit the books? Because I know we started that program pretty recently and we were ramping up. This is Medicaid billable fees for transport.
There was some money included in the 2022 budget during your deliberations last fall.
So I just
And so
want
we're
to say
adjusting that.
thank you and congratulations, because this is something that
Huge.
has long been needed, and it really is an important function, which will hopefully go to resolving some of the overtime questions so we get to actual budget for these services and they pay for themselves. Unusual and good development. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Ms. Zelitel?
Thank you. On the garnishment, with the higher amount coming from the legislature, I would double check, and I'm actually uncomfortable with assuming that it's one lump sum and not dividing the two out, because I believe that the energy rebate won't be subject to garnishment as part of its passage.
Dan Moore may be able to contribute to that. Yeah.
I'll probably bring my stuff over here. So Dan Moore from Treasury. We have the whole history on the PFD garnishment, and back in, gosh, I want to say it was 2008 maybe, when there was an energy credit under Governor Palin. We did submit for garnishment, and we did receive an increased garnishment that included that payment.
I appreciate that. And I've also heard specific talk in the legislature that they are going to possibly make it immune to garnishment. So I
Okay.
just want us to be, if
Okay,
you want to be
sure.
cautious,
Mhm.
this would be one of those places to possibly do so.
Okay.
And we do have them separated, the numbers for you.
Thank you, Ms. Zelitel. Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Okay, the non-property taxes that are included under the tax cap, in terms of changes from what you saw last fall. Motor vehicle rental tax up 1.7 million, tobacco tax 1.2 million, marijuana 200. You can read these, I realize. MISA payments, a drop of 742,000. Motor vehicle registration taxes down 800,000, and fuel taxes projected to be down 80,000.
Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could we have a little bit more detail on the fall in the use of MISA? Is that predominantly SWS or AWU, or kind of what's the breakdown there and what's driving the fall?
We can get back to you with that. I mean, instead of me rummaging through my notes, unless it's important to know right now.
No, it's okay,
Okay,
but yeah,
all
that
right,
would
well,
be great to
yeah,
know.
we'll follow. We'll get back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar.
Quickly then.
And Mr. Constant?
Thanks. So that's interesting, the fuel tax going down, that's counterintuitive. When the prices have gone up so high, are people driving less, or what's the reality there? Do we know? And you can get back later for that.
Well, Dan can help you with that, but remember that the fuel tax is based on per gallon, not price.
And that was
That's
going to be
right,
my
it's not
answer.
per
Correct.
price. Okay, it's not a
That's correct.
percentage. Thank you.
Okay, so now the next favorite slide is the tax cap calculation, which is a green piece of paper in your packet. We're having a little technical difficulty, but you wouldn't be able to read it anyway on the thing. So again, this is what you've seen before in terms of calculating the tax cap. The bigger changes are on lines 9 and 10 on the tax cap itself. And again, that's the, plus 9.9 million in PILTs, but a loss of 9.3 million in MISA, and that's associated with the change from ML&P not paying a MISA and the fact that Chugach pays a PILT. So in the end, it's pretty net zero. And then we were talking earlier about on line 22, the change due to consumer price index. So you can see that because we use the 5-year average, the tax cap increased 1.7% this year. So there's a smoothing out of the change over time. So that resulted between that and the change in the population, the net was almost $3 million increase in the tax cap itself. In terms of other significant changes, the motor vehicle rental tax, that's $3.2 million of an increase compared to the tax cap calculation of last year. Again, we've talked about PILT. So we get down to on line 47. Is that okay to keep going like this? All right, you okay? Line 47, the limit on property taxes that can be collected is the $297.9 million, which is a $1.2 million increase when compared to the tax cap last year. In terms of the limit on the property taxes, because then we've added in the ASD, unused tax limit capacity of $991 million, which brings us on line 51 to the limit of the property taxes that can be collected within the tax cap, which is the $298.9 million, for an increase of almost $1.2 million when compared to last year's tax cap. So when you boil it down to the property taxes to be collected under the proposal that we have before you, the total is $293 million, which is $4.6 million less than the amount of property taxes collected last year, and brings us to $5.8 million below the tax cap.
Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Frasca. So this is the number I was asking for
Okay.
at the very beginning, was this 298.8, so basically 299 million. And as you said at the beginning, so you told me that the tax cap number we used when we set the budget back in November, December was 295.9, I think was the number you gave me. And so basically what you're saying is the tax cap from when we did it in the fall has jumped about $3 million, has increased about $3 million. And then we are now, this proposal is now 5.8 million under that higher threshold.
Correct.
Okay, so it's not 5.8 million under what we proposed in this fall. It's 5.8 million under this new higher threshold, which is $3 million more than we had to work with back in the fall.
Yeah, that was a preliminary tax cap calculation.
Right.
Okay,
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar.
all right. Okay, so now we move into the spending side of what we've proposed. And Marilyn's having some technical difficulties that the slides won't advance, so we apologize for those that are relying on the boards. In terms of the spending side, we have fire department, the police department. Fire department, we're proposing an additional 2.9 million, of which 2.5 of that is for overtime. Then the funding for their new firefighter contract is an additional 965. And then we were also able to have a savings in the amount that's paid to AWWU for hydrant maintenance. And this is the result of an RCA decision. And the cost of this $620,000 cost is going to be paid by AWWU's charging commercial properties. But it does save taxpayers those dollars. In the police department, over 2.7 million, of which 2.5 million is associated with overtime. And then they do have two contracts that have the CPI, the Anchorage Jail, 192,000, and the Girdwood Police Services contract of 33,100.
Mr. Constant?
Thank you. So with the approved spending, assuming the fire department appropriations are made, does that then project out a budget that we anticipate we won't see at the end of the year, an unbudgeted overtime number, so that next year people don't feel bad about having to provide essential services to the muni?
This is intended to allow them to get to the full year and come in on budget or under budget.
That's very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Next is Ms. Quinn Davidson and then Mr. Weddleton.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Ms. Frasca, is on the green sheet, sort of toward the bottom, line 49, the 991,378 number, is that part of the ASD 2.3 million?
No,
Okay, could
This
you,
is just the capacity, the authority to collect taxes. The 2.3 million was taxes that had been already collected
that were
in
over?
June, that because of the state limit on how much we could contribute to the schools, we couldn't contribute. So
So-
that's real money,
Mhm.
and this is capacity to collect taxes.
Okay, and so was that 2.3 then built into, where did that 2.3 go?
We're proposing to contribute it to fund balance, if you will.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
so it's part of all of these calculations. It's
We're
included
relying
in,
on that,
Okay,
relying on that
got
money
it.
to help pay
Thank
for services.
thank you.
Correct.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. Next is Mr. Weddleton and then Ms. Zelitel.
Thanks. So we shortchanged Girdwood Fire and Rescue, I think just about 13,000 with the previous budget on our agreement with them. Is that fixed?
I don't think so. Well, let's get back to you because we were just talking about that before we came down here. I think it's a different item, but let me get back to you
Sure.
on that. Okay.
Thank you,
Unless
Mr.
you have
Weddleton. Ms. Zelitel?
Thank you. I think it's important when we're talking about the fire department, not to call that overtime. It's the way the payroll is structured, frankly. And so I really don't like calling that. I would prefer it to be called payroll because it's not that we're incurring overtime because we're doing something different operationally or there's some particular need. And overtime is usually assumed as something maybe more extraordinary or a one-off. Like you have to, your boss makes you work overtime. That's not the case with the fire department. It's the way their shifts are structured. And then I would like that same clarification on police overtime. Is it because we don't have enough officers? Is there a lot of one-off situations that are requiring people to work outside their normal routines? Or if this is all routine, I think it's payroll.
Thank you, Ms. Zelitel.
So if I could clarify, also in the fire department, a lot of that is related to leave cash in. So do you think that's payroll or, okay.
It's
a
definitely
policy.
payroll and benefits. It's not due to some new additional thing being required.
Okay. So
Thank you,
noted.
Ms. Zelitel.
Other major spending changes in this proposed package includes the CAMA Go Live, the city's property assessment program, as well as some support-related costs. Maintenance and operations, increased utilities and facility contract costs. The museum and performing arts center contract increase. And then the city hall lease has every 5 years, there's a CPI adjustment, and it's due this year for $250,000.
Yeah, I just want to make a pitch for us figuring out a better deal. We've bought this building 3 or 4 or 5 times, and it's all profits for a third-party property owner. And the municipality is a real estate entity, and we shouldn't be buying this building any more times. We've already bought it, but we continue to pay it as a leasehold, and it makes me crazy. And that number right there is on top of the $6 million we're already paying every year for this building, which this building is probably valued at now $6 million. And so every year we're buying this building, or every couple of years, and we should buy a building and just be done with this conversation because that number is painful to me.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Trainee would appreciate that comment. Ms. Bresca?
Okay. Other major spending changes, we have added $689,000, or we propose for ASD pools. Okay, the funds would go to the Parks Department for the purposes of operating the pools. We did what we call a scrub of all of the city's labor costs. And the result of that scrub is really a truing up of matching the people who are in the positions and what they're actually being paid versus what they had been budgeted. And as a result of that scrub, we were able to identify $2.4 million in savings. And not one position was, not one employee lost a job as a result of that, or will lose a job as a result of the scrub. Overall, there are 9 new positions being requested. There's 7 associated with the pools, 1 in the municipal manager's office, and 1 in OMB.
So I have Mr. Weddleton, Mr. Dunbar, and then Ms. Zelitel in the queue. Mr. Weddleton?
Yeah, thanks. So on the pools, I guess a couple of things. You have more money and then you also have 7 new people. Is that, so can we expect more public use of the service high pool?
Well, we have
Not
to
to get
talk
too
to the public
specific.
about that. Pardon?
Not to get too specific, but I mean, is this to increase use or is this to kind of break
To
even?
keep them open, because the mayor, as I've been told, that the mayor's budget did not have the funds in it for the pools. Was this one of the back and forths? I have to ask you guys.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's thought about it, reflected, and chose to add back the funds so the pools can stay open.
Okay, so it's basically break even, but that's still good. Thanks.
No, we didn't.
No, we didn't do the polls, actually.
Okay,
But anyway,
okay, good point.
no, we complained, but
Didn't take action.
just a general complaint. Okay, sorry.
Okay. All
Thank you,
right.
Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Dunbar, and then Ms. Zelitel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm curious how the labor scrub interacts, if it does at all, with the hiring freeze. And, it's true nobody's losing their job now, but does that include, are we sort of scrubbing positions that we would have hired back last summer, but for the hiring freeze?
No, the hiring freeze is not, the hiring freeze, not hiring somebody doesn't enter into the scrub.
Okay.
If the position was budgeted, it's still budgeted, but we just adjust steps.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Ms. Zelitel, and then Mr. Peterson?
So I think I'm going to ask Mr. Dunbar's question in another way. Did the labor scrub savings eliminate any vacant positions?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, that's not the purpose of it. It's really a truing up.
Thank you, Ms. Zelitel. Mr. Peterson, and then we'll go to Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so is some of the scrub savings possibly because we haven't been able to get applicants for some of the open positions? That seems to be a problem pretty much everywhere that I've been told. Thank you.
Well, good question, because some of it is a result of the, what do you call it, the Great Resignation, that we had a lot of people leave. And when new people are hired, they come in typically at a lower grade. And so that's a lot of what this was, is the matching up over time of what happened. But we didn't delete positions that were unfilled. So that's didn't feed into this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Ms. Quinn Davidson, you're good? Okay, great, thanks. Okay. we
Okay,
can
and
move
then the
on.
one last item on this slide is an open item, fuel cost increases. And so what you won't see in here is our request to cover fuel cost increases at this time. Our proposal is to have that be part of the ARPA package. So we will be back to you as we shift gears. If you outright reject that opportunity, then we'll need to factor in some fuel. We'll have to get estimates from the departments regarding fuel cost increases.
Mr. Constant?
Thanks. Do you have a sense of scale of that number?
Not yet. We're in the process of gathering it up.
Ballpark, millions?
I can't.
You don't know?
I don't know.
Okay.
Okay. All right. In summary, in terms of spending, this is a comparison that, again, from first quarter last year to first quarter this year, $10.9 million difference. In terms of property taxes, this is just, it doesn't include the limited service areas. There's a savings, quote unquote, or less 4.6 million. In terms of mill levy, 1.34 million decrease. What it translates into in terms of assessed value is $134 savings per $100,000 of assessed value, or if the average assessed valued home is $420,000, it's a $563 savings. At the BAC yesterday, Mr. Dunbar did ask if we use the 2021 assessed value and the taxes to be collected in 2022, what would be the difference on the in terms of taxes to be paid. So it would be a $38 savings on a home of $420,000 assessed value, or a difference of 0.09 mils. Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Dunbar, and then we have Ms. Zelitel.
I think you mean 0.9 mils, but we'll get here. So at the BAC, you used a different number for that first column. You used 295 million instead of 297 million in that presentation. And can you recall why you used that one instead of this one?
If I did, Mr. Dunbar, it would be my typo because I was screwing around with this slide today, and I will get back to you with what the correct number is.
I think what you did was used what we talked about before, the number that was the 2022 proposed, or I should say the 2022 adopted by the Assembly. I think you used that number in that column, 295.9, and or something like that. And now it's been switched to 297.7. I think I actually agree that this is probably the more accurate number, but it is different. And so what I asked you for was, so we see that there's about a 1.5% reduction from column 1 to column 2 in terms of property taxes to be collected. The 4.6 million is about 1.5% of 297.7 million. But you see the mill rate change is much larger than that. It's about a 5.6% change. And so what I asked at the BAC for, and I have a little bit of advantage over my colleagues because I already saw this presentation yesterday, is if we kept it at the 297.7 million, what would be still the fall in the mill levy? Because clearly something other than this difference here is driving the change in the mill levy. And as you said at the BAC, what's driving that change is the very large increase in the assessment, right? So did you just give me that answer and say that if you were at that 4.6 back in, there would still be a mill levy decrease of 0.9 instead of 1.34?
No, I won't say.
Okay.
But if you want us to do a calculation, we will.
That was
Yeah,
what I asked
yeah.
for yesterday. I
Okay,
understand it takes a little
I
while.
misunderstood, but because what you asked was if we took last year's assessed value, property taxes to be collected this year as we propose, what impact would it have? And that's the number that I provided.
Okay, that was just a miscommunication.
Okay.
That wasn't what I was asking for.
Oh, okay.
What I was asking for, and again, there was a different number on the slide at the BAC, so I